Hi, Gail Fugit, President and CEO of the Advertising Research Foundation, and I'm here with David Cutbill, the U.S. Head of Advisory Services for Media and Entertainment at Deloitte and Touche.
That's right.
And so you've been in that role for a while, but it sounds like it's evolved in the last few years to be a new kind of agglomeration based on what's going on out in digital media and with consumer connections. Say just a bit about that.
Yeah, so for media entertainment for us is kind of broad ranging. So it covers not only the traditional media you would think of, old media or broadcasting, but it also strays into new media, interactive games and social media. So it covers a wide spectrum from the new media landscape to the old. And the advisory service for us is a kind of new, as you said, matching of expertise. So it's everything that's not consulting but you would think of as advisory. So there's a fair amount of risk advisory in there, built around a concept of trust and security, plus a lot of the corporate finance and transactional type services.
Got it. So I loved hearing about your background, and you were a professional tennis player.
Right.
Right? And then my favorite quote is that then the lure of accounting got under your skin, I guess. Right? So say a little bit about that, because these are kind of polar opposites, and or one might think they are. So I'd love to hear how you come to be here at CES in 2016 with that as a backdrop.
That's a long story.
We have a little bit of time. It's a different way of tell me your story.
Yes. So I started playing tennis very young, and then through professional. But as I decided whether to go to college, I was going to come to college in the US and play. But my father wasn't well, and so we decided to track and go to college in England.
Okay.
And so from college in England, I went straight into an accounting firm, and that's how I ended up in accounting.
Okay.
But then back in '93, I worked in media entertainment in London, and it was a natural place. My wife is American, to come to LA, and so I moved for that practice to start running their consulting practice for media entertainment in LA, and so we've been here for 20 plus years doing that.
So it all sounds very like a very logical sequence, and like it all fell into place. Were there any disappointments or failures along the way? I think, this is such a disruptive time in the industry that people are curious, and certainly are. We have 400 member companies. Hearing people's stories about, how do you deal with, discouraging times, or when you think you're headed there and you end up heading over here. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, our industry is always facing disruption. I can't
Absolutely.
remember a time when something wasn't being disrupted, something changes. And so I think there's always opportunity. People tend to focus on things that are disappearing and not focus on the opportunities coming around. And I think we see that.
Say a little more about that, things that are disappearing.
Well, I think we see that in the marketplace now. And so the investors don't know how to value the marketplace.
That's a very good point.
And so because the old providers like the cable, etc., don't have a narrative yet for the marketplace of what it looks like, they're being devalued. And those who are into the news space are being overvalued. And so as those things change and the old media providers start to get a foothold, we'll start to see more of those opportunities, and I think the valuations in the marketplace.
Talk about certainly so many of our member companies, between the advertisers, the ad agencies, even the research companies, the networks, it's all about television advertising. So drill down a little bit deeper on that in terms of television advertising, because you mentioned cable and things. Some people think television is disappearing. What's your take on that?
Television is evolving, I think, and not disappearing. So, because we have this fixed view of television as being sitting in the living room as a passive
the console,
experience,
right?
just watching the TV, and it's kind of measured by ratings, which I think we all agree is kind of out of date and needs to be changed. And what we're seeing now is it's much more of a portable experience. It's more interactive, it's more one-on-one. We had a panel at CES this morning. We talked about short-form content, long-form content, how all of those things are changing. And advertising is going to change with that and evolve with it. So I think the experience will become richer, deeper, more interactive, and that allows for the brands to tell a more compelling story over a longer period of time with individuals. So television is changing. I wouldn't say it's dying.
Yeah, I kind of like to say that it's being reinvented,
Right.
and it's very compatible with what you're saying.
Yes.
So, do you think that it makes sense to approach the consumer with different creative on these different platforms, or as you were talking about building brands and brands telling a story, or do you think that a more consistent marketing approach, which might be considered to be a little old-fashioned, makes sense? Who do you see? How do you see that evolving in the marketplace?
I think right now it's fragmented just because the way we deliver content is fragmented, and so somebody's delivering a piece of content here and here, and it's not well connected, and so there isn't something that tracks you and says, okay, here are all the different things you're doing, and that data isn't connected. So it's very difficult for an advertiser then to connect and tell a story across. But I think what it will do is lead to, and you're starting to see the battle over who owns the consumer. Is it the television provider extending out? Is it going to be the OTT provider trying to control the platform? Are the advertising agencies going to come in the middle and try and do that? Or are you going to see a new company trying to control your information personally? So I think when that comes together and you get more of a compelling experience across platforms, then the advertisers can come behind that. And maybe they're the ones who end up producing more content and telling their story across the platform.
Who do you think is going to own the consumer?
Well, we have...
Or run the consumer? I don't know if it's people talk about harnessing. I'm like, I think we're liberating, not harnessing these days. But
we see potentially two different views, which are kind of one is the curated environment.
Yes.
Which is almost over the top of over the top.
Yes.
Right. So somebody curates all of your experience for you, and you can kind of drive through that to what you want to watch, when you want to watch it, how you want to watch it. The other view says that with all the privacy and other concerns, you're going to want to start to own your own information. And then you have a concept of a personal digital assistant, which some are starting to build, which says, I'm going to own my own digital trail of everything I've done, and my own personal digital assistant, based on what I want, will tell me where I should buy things, what TV show I should watch, where I'm going to see things. So that kind of ownership, will I own it, or will I let somebody else curate it for me?
Yeah, interesting. And I think about that as extending also, you kind of alluded to this, to data management platforms. And whether I worked at General Mills for 32 years, and so, we bought our data from Nielsen. But then we couldn't buy all our data from Nielsen. We had to buy some from IRI, and we had to buy some from NPD, and we had to buy some from some other data providers that were providing data from organic sales companies. And now there's like farmers markets if you're looking across food.
Right.
And so you would think that maybe today that an advertiser might be compelled to create their own data management platform, because it seems like even as you describe it, there's some things are being disintermediated, and there are almost too many links in there.
Right.
Kind of what's your take on that?
It may well be the advertiser, it may be the advertising agency.
Yes.
It may be some buying where the retail platform gets back into the production side, or you start to get some of that come together. It's interesting, I think if you look outside the US where that doesn't happen, it's not necessarily the same. So within China, where you have a few companies who do everything, then the experience can be completely different because they can follow you over a long period of time and influence your traffic movements, whether in retail, you're watching one of their shows, or you're on social media, they own all of that data. So it's just interesting in the US because there's such barriers between each of those data pockets. And so whether those barriers will break down, or maybe some of the companies will just migrate across the barrier.
Yeah, I think it is going to be very interesting to see. So it feels like you have jumped out to be at the lead in so many industries over the course of your career. How did you navigate that? And were there times when you felt like you didn't ooh, maybe this wasn't such a good idea, maybe I should be over there, and you jump over? Did you do that within the same company? Did you move? People ask me all the time, should I stay, or should I hold or fold them, right?
Yes.
How do I know? What's your take on that?
Well, I have a general philosophy which serves well maybe in a professional services firm, which is you should spend about 60% of your time doing what you do now, and you should spend about 25% of your time doing what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years, and then the remaining
That's very
time,
hard to do.
Yeah, remaining time looking 5 to 10 years out.
Even harder.
Yes. And so you're placing bets, right?
Yeah.
But at least you're kind of across the spectrum, because find if you place all of your bets in the time you spend now, something comes past you
Yes.
and you're suddenly out of date.
Yes.
And so you have to track those things.
Yes.
It's very difficult. I think we've proved that we're not very good at projecting out the impact of technology disruption. So if you look close to home with this industry now, remember the days of classified advertising when you pick up a newspaper?
Yeah,
If
I
you
love
even
those ads.
If you even pick up a newspaper now,
Yes.
could you find the classified advertising anywhere? But that got disrupted very quickly by online marketplaces. They just matched buyers and sellers, and they had a completely different profit motive.
Well, and also consumer to consumer, right? Because you're
Right.
looking at consumer recommendations now.
Right.
So it's filtered.
And that's another issue, I think, which is we talk about advertising as if it's one thing. And it's this broad array of things, from brand aspiration to targeted buying to recommendation engines. It's all these things, right? And so if you break those apart, individual pieces may be disrupted in very different ways.
Right. In terms of targeting consumers, there's a lot of talk about millennials, like the M word, right?
Right.
What's your take on that?
Well, we've done a lot of studies and research in our media democracy survey and other things around different buying habits, and we do split between all the different age groups to see, and there is a clear difference between the buying patterns, and there's a clear difference between the attention span and the multitasking that goes on between different millennials. I think the big question people are asking is, if you're a millennial now, but then at 28 you have kids,
Are you going to
do you
change?
still map the millennial behavior?
Right.
Or do you now become a 28-year-old who has kids and start behaving in a completely different way, and now you're worried about your privacy, you're worried about other things? And so I think we're starting in our research to see that happen. And so then it's not necessarily...
So you are seeing a shift in values?
Yeah, so millennials, as they come through, do change behavior. And so that then is a different storyline to everything's going to be different, because millennials will flow through the entire system.
Or they'll stay the same all the way through. No generation stayed the same all the way through, right?
Right, we've all changed.
Yeah.
Right? We all become a little bit more conservative.
Caricatures of ourselves, I think. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So measurement. Do you think that measurement has kept up with technology? You know, you're speaking about technology and the role of whether the consumer is even keeping up with technology. But speak about measurement a little bit. I'm really interested in your take on that.
I think you'd find it hard to find anybody who thought measurement had kept up, right, from any side. So whether you're a television provider, you would say, okay, the ratings are very blunt, and they're not tracking all the second and third viewings and the multi-day viewings that happen after. And it also doesn't track that kind of one-on-one customer experience. It just talks about genres and groups and people and what you get. One of the things I think people are starting to demand is that it's outcome measurable. And what I mean by that is, I advertise to Gail, and now I know what Gail does with that advertising afterwards. And ratings doesn't do that for you.
The whole path to purchase, right? So you have to integrate those metrics.
Right. And I think that's what technology will do for us. It's not necessarily going to change the creativity, but it's going to make it more frictionless, should make it content specific. So wherever you're watching, whatever you're doing, it should make it time relevant, it should be real time, it should be tailored to you, micro-targeted. So technology will start to enable all of those things, which ratings really doesn't do now.
Fascinating. So talk about what do you feel your biggest success has been this past year?
I think
A time of reflection.
a time of reflection. For us, I think it's a focus around an often overused term called ecosystems.
Yeah,
Everybody talks about ecosystems.
it is overused.
And nobody has any idea what it
Yeah,
means.
along with big data. Yeah.
But television and advertising has so many different parties involved that it is changing the dynamics, and you change one piece and the whole ecosystem changes. And so for us, we're really trying to get a better understanding of what does it mean to be an ecosystem, what's the platform, how does it work, who are the participants, how do you make changes, how do you interact. And I think if you start to understand better the dynamics of an ecosystem, then you can start to shape it for the future. And I think that's what everybody wants to do.
We're all trying to do that. How are you doing that? Have you chosen just some different clients to work on experimenting, or kind of what approach are you taking?
So we're starting with a few clients to have those conversations. We also did some research around the patterns of disruption, which says if you look at how things are disrupted, there are standard patterns. And you feel it's happened in the automotive industry with the sharing, it's happened with the hotel industry with sharing of extra rooms, etc. So there are standard patterns. And so if you could look at those standard patterns and say, well, within advertising, how might we be impacted by some of those patterns? And advertising gets impacted not just directly, right? Because the automotive industry, if it changes, the advertising changes. Right? And so you're a recipient of advertising buying, but if the large car companies get disrupted, then their buying goes away. So we're trying to use that kind of disruption pattern combined with the ecosystem, say let's see if we can really understand how disruption will happen.
Well, and I think they're trying to figure out, and I didn't understand this when I worked in packaged goods, but they're really trying to figure out across publishers, if I have $1 to spend, where should I spend my next dollar?
Right.
And what's the effectiveness of the money I'm spending now, right? And just the same way that you talk about your time management, like 60, 25, 50, I'll add to 110 probably, but you're the accountant.
Yeah.
The same applies to how you spend your marketing dollars if you want to grow, I think. The concern about starting with last year's plan, you're so much at what we refer to as the bleeding edge, leading out in terms of technology and your experience and your vision. What do you think it's going to take for people to be able to liberate their spending and apply some investment to, some bets, place some bets on some new touch points and make some bold moves, shift 25% over to a different publisher?
I think it's going to come down to trust. And so the difficult thing...
Trust between parties?
Trust between parties.
Yeah.
So in the past, you knew who you were advertising through. You either trusted the newspaper or you trusted the broadcast channel.
That's true. You just pass the money over.
And so it wasn't really the marketing officer's role to say, okay, do I trust where I'm spending the money?
That's a really good point.
But in digital, they've suddenly been confronted with it.
And their bosses are saying you're accountable. You have to prove that it worked,
That's right.
Or you can't stay.
And so we have an offering around traffic quality, because do you know if it's a bot or really a human that's buying that? And it's not black and white. There's a grey in between it. Do you know where your advertising is being placed, and you comfortable that your reputation should be associated with those things? Again, not black and white. So suddenly the chief marketing officer real time has to make these reputational assessments and say, do I have the trust that I can place that our brand, which is fragile, it could be changed on a daily basis, is sitting in the right places?
Do you think that bots and fraud, do you think that's going to get sorted out, this whole topic of ad fraud, in the next year? I know there's like big push.
I don't think so, because it's just going to continue to evolve. That technology evolves. It's an interesting thing that fraud is not often directed at advertising. It's the companies who are actually trying to commit fraud somewhere else, create the bots that then trick the advertising engines.
Interesting.
And so they're continually...
So they're going to get more sophisticated.
They'll get more sophisticated, right? And then you have to come in and say, okay, how do we measure and eliminate that? Because in the end, you're going to want some sort of managed service that says, I understand everything that went on, and I got a reasonable amount of trust that I got what I paid for.
And you mentioned privacy a couple of times. When do you think privacy is going to rear its ugly head? I mean, or it's, beneficial head in terms of consumers basically saying that's it, or something happening that actually reveals how much information is in the hands of third parties. And
I think we're probably already there. Speaking as an original European, the European Union is clearly pushing that. They've repealed the safe harbor rules.
Correct.
Now, and they've just put in the mega document in draft form around privacy.
Yes.
And so I think they're, from a regulations perspective, driving that. But I think from a consumer perspective, we're also going to start to get there as well. Because as you start to see those advertising places, which clearly it's based on what you did 10 minutes ago, I think there's a fine line between being a friend and being an online stalker.
Yes.
And so I think consumers will start to drive some of that.
Yes, I went to, my husband and I went to Cuba 3 years ago, and I'm still getting the ad for white linen Cuba Vera pants, right? Because I bought him one pair of pants. So, yes, and those things, they become oddly irritating and spooky at the same time, right?
Yes, we have a friend who said they have the Netflix account out with their son who's at college.
Yeah.
And suddenly she's now getting advertising for beer bong.
Okay, there you go.
And she wants to change that profile. That's
Send that. I know, yeah, exactly. So, see, in your profile it talks a lot about family and business, and I think people would be interested in hearing, in terms of successes, disappointments, approach, your perspective on that. Say a little bit about that. You're obviously a very successful business person. How have you comported yourself? It was very clear in, reading your story and trying to get to know you a little better through press clippings, which is artificial. So this is the real deal.
Right.
That's really a key part of your values, and that's the kind of thing people are really curious about.
I think it depends on what you value, because that's where you spend your time. So family and friends is the highest of the value. Work is work in the end. We love what we do, hopefully.
Yeah.
But it is work, it isn't life.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we live in a world where you could work 24/7. And so you have to decide where the boundaries exist and stick with that.
How did you do that?
I think just segmenting off either time or areas or activities and just saying, those things are going to come first. So I coached both my sons in soccer. And so it just became an appointment on the calendar we had to do. And the advantage is having an English accent. Everybody assumes you know what you're doing.
That's correct.
Whereas if I coached baseball, they would have lynched mobbed me in about a week and a half. So.
Yeah, I'm sure. They were like, come help us figure this out. We want the winning team, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think segmenting out the time is I think it's pretty hard to do, though.
It's becoming
hard to stick to.
Right. And that's why I think my wife has the Apple Watch and I've resisted the temptation. Because I have a short enough attention span already.
I have one and I won't wear it because I hear it. I guess you can turn that off, but I hear it beeps every single time I get a message, and it's just autonomic that you just feel like you got to look down, and it's happening all the time, right? So
one of my objectives, I think, in the next year is to start the movement around the joy of single tasking.
Okay.
And get back.
How are you going to do that? I want to learn.
And I think we have to do it together and kind of get the bandwagon behind.
Yeah, my team here is rolling their eyes, I'm sure, but I'm like, this ought to be good.
But there's the stress around multitasking.
Absolutely.
Getting back to that days when you did one thing at a time, I think relieves that stress.
And focus. I mean, I was thinking about you in the coaching too, and it's true of coaching and mentors and interpersonal coaching. But I just think that my experience has been once you have the satisfaction, the joy of having done it, then that kind of compels you to be able to do it again.
Right.
So you just kind of make yourself, and then it's like, oh my goodness, I'm definitely going to do that again.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. When you're looking outward and you get the joy from looking outward, then it feeds on itself.
Yeah, exactly. So a prediction. What prediction do you have for 2016? We're at the precipice of this year.
I think for us, the interesting prediction is a non-prediction, which is probably not think many things will change.
Interesting.
And so we don't think television will change significantly. It will continue to migrate. Ad blockers we don't think will have a big effect. We don't think that some of the different models will change significantly, but it's going to be an evolution change. Virtual reality is one of those big topics within CES, but it was 3 years ago. And so we're just starting to get the hardware devices now. And there's just a tail between adoption and the initiation of some of those trends.
Wow. Fantastic. So David Cutbill, has been wonderful to spend time with you and hear your thoughts. And obviously you're a visionary and a provocateur. I love the way you spoke about how we should divide our time out. I'm going to work on doing that in terms of 60% of our time on the day-to-day, on the today things, right?
Right.
A next chunk of about a third on the near-term things, 3 to 5, and then maybe that 10% on the 10 years out, so you're ready and you don't get surprised.
Right.
I think it's really important. I'm going to work on single tasking. I think that's a good plan for all of us.
Good New Year's
I'm not
resolution.
going to go strap on my Apple iWatch, and I really, really appreciate the time that you spent. It's been very, very interesting. It's clear that in your leadership role, in media and entertainment at Deloitte, that I love, because I'm a researcher at heart, that you're offering really fact-based, deeply insightful work that you've put a lot of time and energy into, and it builds confidence among your clients, and certainly builds my confidence in the insights that you've shared today. So thank you so very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.